Hey guys, so today I am here with Matthew, who is choosing to remain anonymous to protect his job, but I'm very excited for this interview because Matthew actually worked at a residential center in Telford for about 5 years where he worked with abused children, and he has been kind enough to join me today to give me some insight on the Telford scandal, which for those who don't know, it was the largest child abuse sex scandal in the history of Britain, with about 1,000 children being abused, raped, drugged, even murdered over the course of the last 40 years. So thank you so much for joining me, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So to kick things off, I'd be interested to know a little bit about your experience working at the residential center with abused children.
Sure, yeah. I worked with quite a few children over the last sort of 5, 6 years. Kids with, complex behaviour, post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, sex abuse, neglect, addiction. You name it,
Mm-hmm.
they've had it. They've had it all. I've worked with them, so yeah, it's quite a mouthful.
Yes, and working with these children, were you under the impression at all that there could be some sort of kind of sex rings operating in Telford?
Absolutely, particularly with the information we're receiving from the police, because these children are, well, they're prime targets. They're incredibly vulnerable. So the police would warn us about particular areas in Telford, one being Wellington, because of activities which they didn't always necessarily label as grooming gangs until sort of later on in the year, when they said, look, we've got, some activities that would be, what's the word I'm looking for? Because they cleverly word it.
Right.
Start that again, yeah. I'm
To
just
kind
trying
of
to think how
mask
to
what's
word
going
it.
on. I mean, it's the same when they refer to them as Asian grooming gangs, instead of saying, well, these are primarily Muslims responsible for this.
Yeah.
Is it even, like, how unsafe and at risk are these children? Is it just, if they're at night wandering alone, or even, with some kind of chaperone? Or is it, like, in the daytime, in broad daylight, are they at risk of being abducted and becoming, forced to become a part of these child sex rings?
But they're at risk 24/7. Whether that's when they're having their daily activities, where they've got their independence and they're going out, whether they run away from their care homes. Because obviously in the care industry, particularly, kids do have a habit of running away. It's a fright or fight situation with them. So when kids would go missing, we'd straight away be going to these places that the police are flagged up, particularly Wellington. So that'd be the first place we look for. Police would always tell us, look for particular cars as well, because, for suspicious activity. But it always seems to fall in areas where it's a Islamic community.
Right.
In fact, there's been quite a few cases that you might have seen in the news, although it wasn't highly covered, where quite a few people from Wellington, Telford, was arrested for grooming and sexual abuse. There was also a few cases of taxi drivers picking up children. Yeah, so we had one case with a taxi driver who picked up a 15-year-old from a nightclub who was underage drinking with a young woman. Basically, he raped her, and it was literally 5 minutes from his home.
Wow.
It's crazy. And in this particular area where this red zone is, you've got two major colleges, you've got a youth centre hostel, you've got 7 children residential care homes. I think there's more now, from my understanding, in that one particular area. So, as you can imagine, in the care industry for these children, they're incredibly vulnerable children, and we're having to deal with this potential threat and issue in this area. And the police knew about it, but they would never word it as,
That's the thing.
Muslims.
The fact alone that the police would warn you about, okay, these are hazardous areas, or these cars, be on the lookout for these cars. The fact that they knew this, it raises a lot of questions, of course. Why didn't the police, they obviously had information about this, why did it take so long, 40 years, for them to do something about Telford? Why, in your opinion, do you think? Of course, I have my own ideas, but I'll let you start.
Well, there was one incident that comes to mind where a man from the Muslim community in Wellington was arrested on a terroristic charge. I don't know what terrorist charge it is because we've had so many. However, he was detained in the main police station at Telford, Manningley Gate, and basically there was a mob of at least 100 plus Muslims outside the police station protesting for his release. This individual was charged and found guilty as well. So straight away, I think the police know that if they're going to be challenging, they're going to be met with a big, crowd.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and
in
also,
other words, like the police are afraid more of the Muslims, obviously, or the people perpetuating these acts than they are of people who would speak out against it, like my child, my friend, my sister, fill in the blank, is being raped and abused. So it's more, well, first of all, on that front, but then also on the front, they'll be called a racist, possibly lose their job.
Well, this is it, absolutely. I mean, at the moment in Telford, there's a massive agenda regarding hate crime and hate speech.
Of course.
They've even made a particular month which is called Hate Speech Awareness Week. So they're really, really pushing this agenda at the moment. So people are frightened to talk in the event of being, branded a racist or even arrested for potential hate speech crime. And that's a really massive agenda that they've got going on at the moment. And I believe also the Muslims in the community as well are scared to speak out themselves. I mean, I can give you an example. One of my colleagues came out of hospital after major surgery during his fasting period. I think it's called Ramadan. I'm not fully up on it. But he was on death's door, and we're like, you need to have a drink of water, and you need to get food, and you're pale as well, you're about to pass out. And he goes, I can't. It's, if my community found out that I passed water or food past my lips, the consequences are just beyond belief. And I was quite shocked by that. I was like, surely there must be some sort of loophole. You're on death's door. He goes, no, I'll get in so much trouble. So
it's incredible.
Yeah, it
I'm curious what the entire atmosphere of Telford was following this news being broken about this big, the largest in Britain child sex abuse ring operating for about 40 years. Were people up in arms? Were there protests? Just what was it like?
It's incredibly frustrating regarding the atmosphere in Telford because, in all honesty, there is hardly any new coverage on it. I think there was a few articles with the mainstream news, as they normally do. They cleverly word stuff as Asian grooming gangs rather than Islamic, community gangs or Muslim grooming gangs. In Telford, there's absolutely hardly any articles. There's hardly been any protest. I am aware of the DFLA, Democratic Footballer Lads Alliance. I think a crowd of 100 turned up quite recently. To who they were met. What's the name of the organisation? Come to me. Oh, that was it. They were counter-protested by United Against Fascism.
Ah, of course.
And literally, it was bonkers to see because
how out of it do you have to be to protest, to counter-protest people who are protesting a child sex abuse ring?
Well, this is it. The banners they were holding was justice for the children, protect, fight, grooming gangs against all extremism, and then you've got this fascism against fascism. The irony, denying them their freedom of speech to protest, and it's like, well, aren't you contradicting yourself there?
Yeah, it's just crazy, the whole thing. But how big is Telford? Like, how is something like this able to operate and go unnoticed for so long? Not to mention, we'll start there.
Well, Telford's quite spread out. It's a very, very progressive town, potentially becoming a city. It's very thriving and we're very spread out. I think it's about 177,000 people central, and then it's kind of just broken up into different areas, spread throughout. How it's gone unnoticed, I think it's just a question of, unless you're working in the industry, you're not going to really know about it. And with the little coverage we're having from the news regarding it, people still won't know. I mean, I was recently called up by a recruitment agency asking if I wanted to go work with children because it's, yet again, they're in absolute dire straits.
Yeah.
the industry, hadn't got a clue. I says, I don't really want to go back into it at this moment in time because of what's going on with the grooming gangs. And she goes, what's going on? I was like,
Oh my
do you not
gosh.
know? That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely ludicrous. And the other thing as well, in the industry, because of the nature of the work, the turnover of staff is quite high, especially in adult social services that will deal with these referral cases of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So unless they're all, as a collective, if they all come together and said something, then it might have been dealt with. The fact that the support workers, the social workers, don't stay in the industry long enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily flagged up or dealt with in time.
Do you think it's solely the fact that people are just unaware, or do you think it's also the fact, the same with the police, it's kind of seeped down to the people as well? They are afraid that if they speak out against this, they'll be called racist or possibly even receiving aggression themselves from some of these gangs or Muslims.
I think it's fear of speaking out. I mean,
the social repercussions are crazy, especially in the UK at this point. And, with the hate speech laws, they arrest people for this. So, like, it is understandable to an extent. But then again, these are children being raped, murdered, abused, drugged. So it's very serious. It's not really, well, I need to protect my reputation, so let's let the kids die.
Yeah, it's surreal. I mean, the Brits, we've always got this motto of stay calm and carry on, right. And there's even branding on it. But how can you stay calm if you can understand what these children have gone through? Imagine having depression, anxiety, throwing an addiction on top of that.
Yeah.
Also with post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're also going through, your hormones. You're growing up, and then you've been sexually abused and assaulted. You've got all that dealing as a child. And yet these people are just staying silent and not doing anything. It's beyond belief.
Yes.
I just don't get it.
Such a motto isn't applicable all across the board, only in certain situations. In ones like this, you need mass protests, outrage. You need to... Obviously, the police aren't really dealing with the problem, it seems. So you need to make them deal with it. Hold them accountable. Not just the police, the politicians as well. That's how you're going to see change here, because this has happened time and time again. It's a trend. Rotherham, numerous others. I mean, do you think there are other child abuse rings operating in Telford aside from this one? I mean, not to mention the UK, there are probably so many, but do you think there are more just in Telford?
Absolutely. I think it's still going on, and I think it will also continue to go on under the radar as well.
Yeah.
Where we're situated, we're next to two major cities, Wolverhampton and Birmingham. Yet again, there's grooming gangs operating in there. We're a 20-minute drive from them, and they'll just commute across the borders.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yet again with the taxi drivers, for example, a lot of these grooming gang members were taxi drivers. The taxi firm in question, they've just had to go through a whole new image change. They've changed the name. They started claiming that they now do DBS checks, which is basically a full disclosure, a security check, etc. That's how bad it's got now, where they're having to do security checks because there's so many Muslim taxi drivers in this area, and that because of the place that we are, it's a very thriving town. There's a lot of work there. And there's new houses being built. The population's getting much, much bigger very, very quickly, and the Muslim community is getting bigger. So I'm not surprised if it's still operating, because we're a thriving town. It's a big attraction, and the Muslim community is, it's growing day by day.
Well, we know that these migrant rapes and these grooming gangs, like they're prevalent all across Europe. It's an epidemic at this point, and most people aren't even aware. Though they'll be like, "What?" And it's not even just, like, rape in itself obviously is horrific, but it's not even just that they're raping these children, these girls. They're torturing them to the point where when you read some of these details, it's just incomprehensible that a human could do that to another human being. But exactly. It seems to me, at least, that these are just extremely prevalent in the UK. I know even like acid attacks, it's the capital in London. There's the most acid attacks in London than there are in the whole world. But why do you think there are so many grooming gangs and migrant rapes like across the UK?
I believe it's the teachings of the Quran, to be honest with you. I'm not a resident expert on it. It just seems it's a pattern. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
it is. Yeah.
Every grooming gangs is it seems to be from an Islamic community. I mean, was it the Prophet Muhammad married Aisha, the child?
Yes.
It's just straight away from day one, it's deemed acceptable. I mean, you've seen documentaries. I think the BBC even did one, which is quite ironic, where they was inside a mosque, and the amount of hatred that they were preaching towards non-believers, the kafir, I think the word they used.
Well, child
You
marriage
know,
is promoted within the religion. I remember the Swedish government recently issued a very controversial pamphlet that they were forced to withdraw because people protested so much, which thankfully, that shows there is some common sense left in Sweden, but it was about child marriage, like this is inappropriate, it's a no, not like you will be put in prison for 10 years minimum for such a crime. It's just crazy though, but this, we see that it's inherent to their religion, their way of life, so why would we welcome it with open arms? Or why would we even be shocked by this?
well, this is it. I mean, ultimately, I think it's going to come down to a reformation. Otherwise, we're going to head into a humongous conflict. Now, I know there's good Muslims out there, but I think they're scared to talk within their own community. And I think they need to start doing more and speaking out. I mean, there are groups that do speak out. And for example, with the bridge attack, London Bridge attack, there were 10 Muslim women that stood on the bridge. Fantastic. 10 Muslim women united, against terrorism. We need more of that. But only 10. Now, you look at the cartoon, for example, that was drawn a while ago about the Prophet. There were thousands of Muslims rioting and protesting in central London. So if they're prepared to protest over a silly cartoon, and yet only 10 representing the whole UK Muslim population, about children grooming 10 children, it's baffling.
Well, I've interviewed Imam Tawhidi before. I'm not sure if you're aware of who he is, but he is an imam his goal is to reform Islam. The problem is I've even asked him, and I'm saying, do you think such reforming Islam is even possible? He's like, no. Most Muslims they would never support it. And number two, even if it was possible, it would take decades upon decades upon decades to reform this, which we don't have that time. So even he admits so of course not all Muslims can be expected to do this, but it is a question of how many would support it. And it seems to be more will support it. And the fact that so many of them are silent when such things like this occur kind of say, well, if Sharia law was implemented, if Islam did become dominant in the UK, many of them would just fall in line and be happy with it. Maybe they're not going to go out and commit terrorism, but or participate in child rape gangs, but they would probably support this when the time comes that they could, in fact, take a dominant position, take power in society.
Well, Sharia law, ironically, is already in place, to be honest with you. You've got hate speech, which is blasphemy laws in effect.
Yeah.
You've got Sharia courts, which are appearing across the country, particularly in London. So it's already here. And yet the government won't do anything about it. It's crazy.
I mean, kind of on that note, in your opinion, what does the future hold for the UK? Do you think that it has a chance? I mean, there's so many people I hear that say the UK is lost, Europe is lost. But I don't necessarily believe that it's lost until it really, really is lost. Obviously, they're not in complete control yet. But what do you think the future holds? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I'm optimistic at the moment, to be honest. The problem you've got very brave people coming out in protests like the DFLA, the FLA. They're easy targets because 90% of them are footballers. So straight away they're associating with what they believe as hooligans or white ring alternatives, extreme rightism. But they never seem to mention the fact that there's Gurkhas in there, there's war veterans in there, and I think people need to start waking up and start attending these events and start showing the numbers behind it, because until they do that, we look very small, and I don't see a future. I think it's just going to get worse.
I absolutely agree. I think the time has passed where it's optional to take a stand and to speak out against this. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, it still is optional. Everyone has free will, but the ramifications of this will be quite severe. It's reached a point now where if you want to save your country, you need to do something. You can't just expect other people to do it anymore.
No.
That time has passed. So hopefully we can see. I mean, you see good things happening in many countries across Europe. I mean, I think Hungary, the Czech Republic, Poland, and are in a great place. Austria is going in a good direction. So, you know, the UK, I think that all of them still have hope, and we'll just see how far they have to be pushed before they do stand up to this. But, of course, then again, in the end, certain countries may be lost. But let's hope one of them isn't the UK.
I hope so. I mean, you mentioned Poland, you mentioned Hungary. People don't know about them because, yet again, it's desensitized. It's not being mentioned in the news.
Yeah, well, the Poland Independence March last year, something like 60,000 estimation attended, and the media was reporting a lot on this march, but just painting everyone there as Nazis, as fascists, essentially.
Really?
Yeah, everyone who went. And there's people from
that.
all over the go. Oh, this march was massive. It was really cool. I was going to go, but unfortunately plans changed and I wasn't able to make it, but I would like to attend this year. It's an amazing event.
Sure. Well, if there is any coverage on it, I'm pretty confident it'll be branded as extreme right.
Yeah, of course. Of course. No surprise there anymore. But
Absolutely.
do you have any last thoughts? Anything else to add?
I think I think the left and right need to find common ground and start accepting the fact that we've both got an opinion, and unless we're going to find common ground, we're only going to drift further apart, and the inevitable is going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's not. I mean, if we can't agree on these huge, huge, huge issues, which should concern everyone, no matter your political standing, then I don't see how we can heal this divide. But let's hope for the best and just keep fighting here. But I really appreciate your time, Matthew, and all of your insight on this. It was really, really a pleasure for me to have you join me today.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the final result.
Of course. And thank you so much to everyone for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you next time.